If you watched my first impressions for the first two episodes of Psycho-Pass Season 3, you would know that I enjoyed it. I was actually very confident coming into future episodes. It felt like Psycho-Pass was on the right track, that the double-length episodes were going to give it the time to flourish, that we'd have 16 episodes in the equivalent of 8 because they're double-length, and everything just kind of felt pretty right. But I have to say, walking out of episode 3, I am even more excited for the remainder of this season. This really felt like a Psycho-Pass episode. The overall direction with the political story was great, but it was really the characters that stole the show with this week's episode. Arta and Kei are extremely fascinating and amazing Psycho-Pass leads. I thought they were pretty cool, especially with the whole mentalist angle. I thought that was an interesting way to, refresh the formula, make it feel like this season of Psycho-Pass would differ from the previous ones. But just to see what they've went through in their past, what they're going to go through in their future, and just what they're truly going for, it kind of shakes up the Psycho-Pass formula in an interesting enough way. Because the episode starts hinting at they have some goal, they're trying to undercover something, and you're like, okay, I wonder if that's going to be later into the season. And then by the time this episode wraps up, you learn that basically their families just destroyed each other, killed each other. We know Kei has his father still kind of hooked up to test tubes and things like that, but ultimately, whatever happened with their family life, you wouldn't expect them to be besties, buddies, and really kind of tackling the world together. But as it's also mentioned in this episode, maybe when you lose everything, all you have left is each other. And that's such a tragic story and such a Psycho-Pass narrative that really sold me. I was having a lot of fun with this episode, but once it wrapped up, I was just kind of sitting back being like, damn, Psycho-Pass is on the right track. And I hope this isn't just a fluke. I hope the remainder of the 5 episodes can carry on this legacy, because this was really, really solid. It had a little bit of everything. There was some comedy, there was some great action, and there was some political sabotage, and just ultimately just kind of once again highlighting Hughes and just the idea of the civil system and putting your faith blindly in a system that tells you what is right or wrong. Something I'm really enjoying about Arta and Kei is just how they don't blindly put faith in their equipment that is run by Sybil. They clearly are following the rules and guidelines and they understand how it works, but something that I really don't think too much of when I think about Psycho-Pass, but I'm glad was brought up, is yes, the Dominators can read into someone. Is it a lethal or non-lethal kill, right? Do they need to stun them? Do they need to make them explode? But there's so many people in this organization who just rely on whatever the equipment tells them. But then you'll have other people saying, there's a trigger for a reason. And it's such a simple line, but it really does highlight how different they are to a majority of the characters that work in this prosecutor division. And that's what I'm really digging, is just how it really does feel like Psycho-Pass at the best moments. It really does feel as if we're kind of underlying this message, and there's obviously the civil system, we don't trust it if we've seen the previous works, right? There's a lot of shady stuff going on. That's kind of why Akane got put into the predicament that she's currently in. However, just when you start seeing more and more layers, and how one of the characters was actually recommended by Akane, and just, it kind of feels like there's a bigger story at play that we don't know exactly where it wants to go as we watch these smaller cases unfold. And that's when Psycho-Pass really excels the most. It keeps your focus on the situation at hand, but then it builds something in the background that's going to be even more crazy by the time the season wraps up. And a big issue season 2 had was it was doing okay in the intro, but then by the end it just had to rush to its ending. But with these being double-length episodes, I don't think they'll have to do that. We'll probably have the final 2 episodes really dive into whatever their main story of the season will be. I thought this was a very pleasant episode overall, because you just have so many moments that are memorable. You have a very disposable scene, but just Arta just kind of full off of his ramen and things like that. Just the little simple scenes that just bring a smile to your face. You have Arta and Kei and his wife eating dinner and kind of discussing wouldn't it be easier for you, since you're visually impaired, to use the kind of just it makes food for you, but no, she doesn't want to lose her heritage and just lose what her mother taught her for cooking. And just there's these little simple moments, but it's those little moments are so memorable because of the length of an episode. It has the time to get into the meat, get into the substance, but then cool it down for 10 or 15 minutes and just let us have these simple moments that are either setting up very serious subject matter or are just having time to be fun and cute. And maybe Psycho-Pass isn't a series that everyone thinks about as being fun or cute, but it is nice because it gives you those human moments and that human touch, and that's what Psycho-Pass is all about, is the human components in a world that is so built on artificial nonsense and how things just go so twisted and corrupt so quickly. This episode is definitely relying heavily on the political side, as we have two frontrunners, one who is just a massive man who will just punch sense into you if you don't believe in yourself, which I have to like, which the whole Tema situation and him being, latent criminal and just how shunned he is from people that shouldn't shun him. It's definitely pretty depressing, but I did like that punch in the intro of the episode where it's just like, it's such a, you shouldn't do that, but it also feels like maybe he needed a smack to maybe give himself a bit of a backbone there against people who really are trying to bring him down. And then ultimately, Kay was the one who had to have the backbone and then ultimately got suspended because he punched someone because he said the wrong thing. It is nice to see how they're putting the focus on this political story, but it's not actually the main focus in the traditional sense. Like, that's ultimately what they're going after, figuring out what's going on, who's sending the hitmen, things like that. But it's all these, little stories connecting and basically why this is happening. I really like how when we get this very glimpse moment of the mental stability with Arta and just going into this female who apparently her mind's just empty, but she's seemingly is like she's the perfect candidate for Sybil, kind of raised as being the ideal person, the ideal mind, no clouded hue, things like that, but she clearly is someone very twisted, and like was mentioned with last week's episode, she would be the worst criminal should she pursue it. And I thought it was interesting how they don't go too heavy in the political themes, but they definitely went into some interesting subject matter, like how she'll have these talking points of being the neighbor policy and how look after ourselves first instead of looking after other people. And she's presenting it as if it's not a toxic selling point, but really it's them just saying, we're going to look after ourselves, screw everyone else. But then you look on the other side of the political spectrum and they're pretty much doing shitty things too. And some of the characters are basically just saying they're all frauds and fakes. And it's like, yeah, they absolutely are. And you do get some immigration topics within this episode as well, because I didn't actually realize, but Kay is an immigrant from Russia, I believe. And the idea of you have people in a hospital being like, why would this immigrant get to go first? And just the blatant racism, things like that. It's interesting how a man who is on the side of the law has to put up with so much, and I think that's a big reason why he did snap towards the end of the episode, defending a colleague. Like, he could take it himself, but just seeing the blatant disrespect for people who should have respect, who are protecting you and things like that, I thought it was an interesting piece of subject matter that I think will play a heavy part into what Kay is truly after, because even though it does feel like Arta and him are really in good connections, I do wonder if there is some more underlining themes that will pop up that may be like a wedge issue for them. Though I did find it quite interesting that this was, I believe, the first time we saw his mentalist ability actually shake him to the point that was he going to come back out. And I think that's going to be a pretty fun thing, because the more clouded of a hue, the more clouded of a person in psyche, I am curious how dangerous it would be for someone like Arta. And that's what I'm really enjoying the most about this season of Psycho-Pass is, yes, the mentalist ability could be something that could be more plot-centric, and it's like, did they just introduce it with no explanation just because they would have a new gimmick? But I do find it's adding an interesting flair, like a new seasoning to the stew, and do assume in a world like Psycho-Pass, it is more than just connecting with emotions. There's probably something going on neurological, some form of enhancements or something like that. In a world with as much technology as we have, I would be actually shocked if it was just something natural that you could read into people's emotions. I do imagine that's part of it, as I mean, there's people who literally study to read into human psyches and things like that. But the idea to relive their memories as if you are them because you're connecting to that has to be something on the technological side. I'd be shocked if it wasn't, but obviously only time will tell if they're going to go down that route, or maybe just completely ignore it and just say that is the mental ability and they're not going to go too much into it. But ultimately, this was a very, very fun episode, and like I mentioned with my first impressions, I'm loving the visual presentation. This series looks so damn good. Even just the general shots, there are so many times they'll just pull away and let us look at the city, and it looks so damn good, whether we're looking at billboards of the political campaign or just the city and just the lights. It's like, this looks like such a clean and futuristic world, but when we know what Sybil's actually doing, it's actually a more twisted system than maybe the surface layer lets you view. But then when we got into the action sequence, the action is really good. And what I'm appreciating the most about these fight sequences is they're not overly complex. They're actually directing it as if it's supposed to feel realistic. One of my favorite parts of this sequence is when Arta basically kind of is like chasing them, and then you'll see like just throw down carts. They'll throw down anything to basically get them so they'll have to stop. It's the little moments that feels like if you were actually running for your life, you would try to throw things and get people to be caught up in it. Obviously, people like Arta have a lot more martial arts capabilities, so they can kind of do some wall running and things like that. But when it comes to the hand-on-hand combat or just fleeing, it actually does feel quite realistic, and they don't make the fights overly long. They let them just be a couple of punches, throw them down, pin them down, try to choke them, not something that's supposed to feel like a shonen fight that gets dragged out for 3 episodes as they just charge up an energy ball. And that's what I'm really digging, is that the action set pieces, when they are present, they're not overly long, they're not overly short, they're just the proper length for what you should expect with a fight sequence in Psycho Pass, and when characters do get brutally murdered, it's quite graphic, and that's why the Dominators have to go out in lethal force. That's just what's super fun about this show, is like, it feels so Psycho Pass, but there is this slight difference. It just feels like the way the casts are interacting, it's a lot more mundane in a way, but that's not a bad thing. It almost feels like as they're investigating political campaigns and things like that, because they're not basically trying to rush to stop a terrorist who's going to destroy the city, yes, there is criminals they have to stop, but they don't have to always feel like their lives are in danger, like with, say, season 1 or something like that. And I thought it was interesting just seeing both the new characters and returning characters and how they're interacting. It just feels very genuine, as if this is just their job. Yes, they're going to have their intense moments, which typically will be brought up when they're on the field investigating in those action pieces, but ultimately what they're doing is they are friends, they're colleagues, and it doesn't feel like they're going the direction of past projects of when they are just talking. It feels like really genuine interactions, and I'm really appreciating that. Overall, I'm very excited for episode 4 next week, but as always, let me know what you thought down in that comment section below. Did you love it as much as myself, or did you find it a bit of a letdown? Whatever you feel, let me know. And be sure to like the video if you did enjoy, and also hit that subscribe button if you have any news. So until next time, everyone, please take care, have a good one.